One of the reasons for this is that funding gets released. We saw when there was the Ebola crisis that when it became a public health emergency of international concern, funding was released, and that enabled people to work towards a vaccine much faster. Here, funding was available immediately for this, relatively immediately for this public health emergency. And it meant that people could do things that are not normally possible, such as to stack different parts of trials on top of each other so they could run things concurrently, which they'd normally do in sequence, but instead they were able to do all of the things at the steps at the same time. As well as work on some vaccines that may likely fail, but they had the seed funding available in order to start work on them. In addition to that, you were able to start to manufacture vaccines right at the beginning of the process that you thought were likely, even though the trials hadn't yet been completed. So a lot of different steps led to the speed. Another factor is many of the agencies that are reviewing the information about the studies, the practical data, the study data that comes out, were able to do this in a rolling way rather than do it all as a bunch, receive a huge bunch of papers. They're working on the data as they received it so that they're able to arrive at their decision fairly quickly. We know that short-term side effects certainly are present. So some people may experience fatigue or a headache or muscle pains, but these are all short-lived. And it seems that if you're older, you're much less likely to have these side effects. And certainly the second time around, you're less likely to have the side effects. But as far as longer-term side effects are concerned, infertility and sterility are very unlikely, but it is impossible to be categoric because I would be telling a lie. We've only had the vaccines around for a few months. I would take it straight away because I just would never want to either suffer with COVID myself or transmit it to somebody that I loved and have them suffer, not only because it's been killing hundreds of thousands and we know the numbers all around the world, but it's also causing longer term symptoms in some people. So what we've heard of as long COVID symptoms of possibly as a result of end organ damage where people have difficulty breathing, they have extreme fatigue, lethargy, and they just can't get back to their previous selves before they had COVID, is lasting now for months and may last for even longer than that. And that does not sound like something we'd wish on anybody. So I would absolutely take the vaccine in order to protect myself and to protect the people that I love and to protect the community in general. I think it's the right thing to do. We have lived with influenza for hundreds of years. The reason that it's such a successful virus is the fact that it is able to mutate very quickly. This particular coronavirus does not seem to mutate as much, although I have to tell you, I'm not a virologist, but that's my understanding. However, we certainly have seen mutations, there is no question. The fact that we have this new vaccine technology that can be changed relatively quickly to give something that's efficacious, or that's at least what we're being advised, the mRNA type vaccines, means that we have the ability perhaps to be a step ahead of this particular virus. So I'm hoping we will be able to get it really well under control. To say we can eliminate it is something that I can't say with confidence. We have been trying, for example, to eliminate polio for decades. We have almost got rid of it around the world, but it remains present in, I think, 3 countries in the world.
You still run rings around your kids or grandkids. You can show the young people a thing or two. You wouldn't say you're old just yet. You may not think you're vulnerable to COVID-19, but you are. high-risk individuals with COVID can get long-term damage, including lung damage, brain fog, and loss of smell. In some cases, they may die. People aged over 60 are strongly encouraged to get vaccinated for yourself, your family, and the community to keep yourself healthy and feeling young. For information on how priority individuals can get vaccinated, visit hsa.ky.
The COVID-19 pandemic is affecting everything from forest cover and marine pollution to the behavior of wildlife, but most of all, of people. Me, you. After Hurricane Ivan, Caymanians discovered we are vulnerable to calamities we thought only happened elsewhere. We were reminded then, as we are being reminded now, that we are resilient. We are powerful. We are community-minded, Cayman kind. For the people of the Cayman Islands, moments of crisis also present opportunity. We are the narrators. You are the catalyst for change. You are responsible. This is not just our pandemic story, but it is the story of how 3 tiny islands came together to change course in uncharted waters toward greater national solidarity, functionality, and pride. Me, you.
One of the reasons for this is that funding gets released. We saw when there was the Ebola crisis that when it became a public health emergency of international concern, funding was released, and that enabled people to work towards a vaccine much faster. Here, funding was available immediately for this, relatively immediately for this public health emergency. And it meant that people could do things that are not normally possible, such as to stack different parts of trials on top of each other so they could run things concurrently, which they'd normally do in sequence, but instead they were able to do all of the things at the steps at the same time. As well as work on some vaccines that may likely fail, but they had the seed funding available in order to start work on them. In addition to that, you were able to start to manufacture vaccines right at the beginning of the process that you thought were likely, even though the trials hadn't yet been completed. So a lot of different steps led to the speed. Another factor is many of the agencies that are reviewing the information about the studies, the practical data, the study data that comes out, were able to do this in a rolling way rather than do it all as a bunch, receive a huge bunch of papers. They're working on the data as they received it so that they're able to arrive at their decision fairly quickly. We know that short-term side effects certainly are present. So some people may experience fatigue or a headache or muscle pains, but these are all short-lived. And it seems that if you're older, you're much less likely to have these side effects. And certainly the second time around, you're less likely to have the side effects. But as far as longer-term side effects are concerned, infertility and sterility are very unlikely, but it is impossible to be categoric because I would be telling a lie. We've only had the vaccines around for a few months. I would take it straight away because I just would never want to either suffer with COVID myself or transmit it to somebody that I loved and have them suffer. Not only because it's been killing hundreds of thousands and we know the numbers all around the world. But it's also causing longer term symptoms in some people. So what we've heard of as long COVID symptoms of possibly as a result of end organ damage, where people have difficulty breathing, they have extreme fatigue, lethargy, and they just can't get back to their previous selves before they had COVID, is lasting now for months and may last for even longer than that. And that does not sound like something we'd wish on anybody. So I would absolutely take the vaccine in order to protect myself and to protect the people that I love and to protect the community in general. I think it's the right thing to do. We have lived with influenza for hundreds of years. The reason that it's such a successful virus is the fact that it is able to mutate very quickly. This particular coronavirus does not seem to mutate as much, although I have to tell you, I'm not a virologist, but that's my understanding. However, we certainly have seen mutations, there is no question. The fact that we have this new vaccine technology that can be changed relatively quickly to give something that's efficacious, or that's at least what we're being advised, the mRNA type vaccines, means that we have the ability perhaps to be a step ahead of this particular virus. So I'm hoping we will be able to get it really well under control. To say we can eliminate it is something that I can't say with confidence. We have been trying, for example, to eliminate polio for decades. We have almost got rid of it around the world, but it remains present in, I think, 3 countries in the world.
You still run rings around your kids or grandkids. You can show the young people a thing or two. You wouldn't say you're old just yet. You may not think you're vulnerable to COVID-19, but you are. High-risk individuals with COVID can get long-term damage, including lung damage, brain fog, and loss of smell. In some cases, they may die. People age over 60 are strongly encouraged to get vaccinated for yourself, your family, and the community to keep yourself healthy and feeling young. For information on how priority individuals can get vaccinated, visit hsa.ky.
The COVID-19 pandemic is affecting everything from forest cover and marine pollution to the behavior of wildlife, but most of all, of people. Me, you. After Hurricane Ivan, Caymanians discovered we are vulnerable to calamities we thought only happened elsewhere. We were reminded then, as we are being reminded now, that we are resilient. We are powerful. We are community-minded, Cayman kind. For the people of the Cayman Islands, moments of crisis also present opportunity. We are the narrators. You are the catalyst for change. We, you, are responsible. This is not just our pandemic story, but it is the story of how 3 tiny islands came together to change course in uncharted waters toward greater national solidarity, functionality, and pride. Me, you.
One of the reasons for this is that funding gets released. We saw when there was the Ebola crisis that when it became a public health emergency of international concern, funding was released, and that enabled people to work towards a vaccine much faster. Here, funding was available immediately for this, relatively immediately for this public health emergency. And it meant that people could do things that are not normally possible, such as to stack different parts of trials on top of each other so they could run things concurrently, which they'd normally do in sequence, but instead they were able to do all of the things at the steps at the same time. As well as work on some vaccines that may likely fail, but they had the seed funding available in order to start work on them. In addition to that, you were able to start to manufacture vaccines right at the beginning of the process that you thought were likely, even though the trials hadn't yet been completed. So a lot of different steps led to the speed. Another factor is many of the agencies that are reviewing the information about the studies, the practical data.
Via our channels as well as on Radio Cayman. We'd like to first welcome our panelists, starting with His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martin Roper, Premier the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Minister for Health the Honorable Dwayne Seymour, Minister for Finance the Honorable Roy McTaggart. As well, in our studio today we have with us the Honorable Joseph Hugh, Minister for Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure. Also with us in our studio are the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. John Lee, various senior civil servants, the sign language interpreter, and of course members of the media. We begin with a prayer from Erica De Silva from the First Assembly of Church, God Church.
Heavenly Father, we come to you today in thanksgiving of your great love, mercy, and grace given to us through Jesus Christ. We take a moment and say thank you for who you are and for what you're doing in this nation corporately, but also individually. We thank you, Father, for we know that you're in control of all things. Father, you have protected this island, and you continue to do so. We thank you for the leadership you've given this island. We thank you because we know that you have been with them every step of the way, guiding them and giving them everything they need to lead this nation for such a time as this. Father, you have prepared the leadership of this island for this task of leading. So we cover our leaders with prayer, asking you, Lord, to continue to guide and speak to them. When decisions need to be made and processed, send the right counsel and teams their way. Give them strategies they need. Send your encouragement to them when they need it. Protect them and their teams. Father, we pray for this press conference that you bless it. Continue to bless the people of Cayman Islands, and most of all, Lord, have your way in our hearts. May 2021 be a year that your will in our lives and transformation of our minds and hearts will be for your glory. We ask all this in Jesus' matchless name. Amen.
Thank you, Ms. De Silva. We begin now with Dr. John Lee.
Okay to go ahead. Good afternoon, everybody. You want to have results from me, so today's results are a bit different. I'm going to give you some vaccination figures. So far, there have been 11,856 jabs given across the Cayman Islands, which is a phenomenal amount. Of those, there are 3,939, which are people who've had their second doses. I hope you can all understand that as we enter this, I might call the second part of the vaccination program, our vaccination rates will drop a little. They'll in fact drop by 50% as everybody begins to get their second dose, because everybody obviously needs 2 injections instead of just 1 when we started off our program. It's really encouraging to hear that 65% of our over 70s have received the first injections, and 55% of our over 60s. So those are very encouraging figures, and 12.2% of our population overall has received at least 1 dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Whilst I have your attention, I just wanted to discuss a little bit the positive tests for inbound people. We were advised before the introduction of the positive test for the 72 hours before boarding the plane that these are not going to pick up everybody that's positive. Clearly, the test only tells you about the situation that you have at that very moment in time. You could be brewing an infection, or you might meet somebody that's infected on the way to your journey after that first test 72 hours before travel, and then subsequently become infected. So looking at our last 1,500 test results, there were around 420 inbound travelers. Of those, there were 10 positive on their inbound test and 2 positives on exit from quarantine. But 6 of those 10 inbounds were really relatively weak, and by weak, in some countries they use different cutoffs than our conservative Cayman approach, and some countries may have cut off the value at that level and they would not have counted, which leaves only 4 stronger positives, which is a 0.95% positive rate in our arrivals. The reason we use a slightly weaker cutoff point is because we're in a situation clearly where there is no COVID in our community in the island. So we wish to be ultra cautious with our approach to anybody who might be harboring the condition. I think I'll stop for now, Donna, and take any questions if I may.
Okay. We're actually going to go to the panel now and have all questions afterwards. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. We're going to go now to the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Donna. Hello, everyone. We have a lot to talk about today. I will be addressing our vaccine rollout program and its link to our current border controls. His Excellency will be providing you with some good news regarding availability of vaccines, followed by the Minister of Finance speaking about the country's current financial state and assistance to tourism workers. Minister Hugh will address you on the small business grant program and some new developments there. And Minister Seymour will provide more good news for displaced tourism workers. I would join with Dr. Lee in saying how pleased we all are with how well the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine is going across these islands. As he has outlined, we've had over 11,000 doses administered, including many with their second jab. Once again, I applaud our health professionals and thank them all for their incredible hard work. I would particularly like to commend the HSA on the relocation of the vaccine center to Owen Roberts International Airport. That decision was a stroke of genius. It has enabled more people to be vaccinated at the same time. The added space for people to queue out of the hot sun and room for a comfortable area to relax once you've had your vaccine are all very welcome to everyone, I'm sure. As I've said many times before, the successful rollout of our vaccination program offers us, and indeed the world, the promise that we can begin to think positively about returning to a more normal life. This includes for us the ability to cautiously consider changes to our border controls. We have always said that any reopening of our borders will be contingent on getting as many people vaccinated as possible, but certainly the over 60s and the most vulnerable in our community. Our target for this group is to have 90% of those older than 60 fully vaccinated and thus protected before we can have any move away from the mandatory 14-day quarantine, along with the current testing regime for everyone arriving here from overseas. The data is still being compiled, and Dr. Lee spoke to the most recent figures. But these most recent figures show that we have vaccinated about 55% of those older than 60. We have about another 2,300 or so persons older than 60 to vaccinate to reach our 90% target. I again ask that everyone utilize the opportunity to get your vaccine when the HSA announces the availability of vaccines for whatever group you are in. And please make sure that you return for your second doses. So taking these factors into account, Cabinet, after consultation with the Chief Medical Officer, has agreed that once the 90% target for vaccinations for those older than 60, about 5,000 persons, has been reached, that the border controls can be changed to allow a quarantine period of 10 days for any traveler into our islands who meets the following conditions. They must have had a negative PCR test within 72 hours prior to arrival, as well as a negative PCR test upon arrival at the airport here. They must have completed a valid vaccination program against COVID-19 as approved by the Chief Medical Officer, and they must be staying in a household where all persons have received a full course of vaccination. Members of the household who did not travel but who had the vaccination will not be required to quarantine. Until children are eligible for the vaccine, adults traveling with children will have to continue to quarantine for 14 days. They must also have a negative PCR test on day 10 before being approved to leave quarantine. Whilst I'm sure this is welcome news for many persons in our community, for some they will be concerned, whilst for others it may not seem enough. For those with concerns, I implore you to get vaccinated. We cannot remain closed forever. In any event, we are not throwing open the border by any means, and will ensure that any decisions always have public health in mind. This decision, in my view, certainly does that. For those who think these proposed changes will not go far enough, we understand your concern, especially if you work or worked in tourism. I know that the reduction in the quarantine period still does not encourage tourism. But if I could liken this to the period last year when we were opening up our local economy in phases, this is but the first safe step. Just as we did last year, we are patiently opening bit by bit as we gain confidence in our safety. We must do the same with our borders. We cannot be careless and allow COVID-19 back in our midst. So patience and careful are the watchwords. Again, this is a first step and will help us to evaluate what we do next once we see what is transpiring with the virus, as well as how our neighbors and indeed the world are getting on with their own vaccination programs and fight to eliminate COVID-19. We have been very fortunate indeed to receive the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine from the United Kingdom, and this has paved the way for the vaccination program currently in progress across our islands. I once again wish to thank the United Kingdom government, His Excellency the Governor and his office for ensuring that we have received supplies as part of the UK vaccine program. Given the importance of ensuring that we vaccinate the people that we need to reach in as timely a manner as possible, we must ensure that the precious doses of vaccine received are kept for our local resident population. So to ensure we protect those who reside in our islands first, I wish to reiterate that the COVID-19 vaccines are limited to those who are legally and ordinarily resident in these islands. In closing, I again encourage everyone to get protected, get vaccinated. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to questions in due course.
Thank you, Premier McLaughlin. Honourable Governor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. As the Premier said, I just want to say a few words today about vaccines from the UK. First of all, just to reiterate again that the UK's commitment to supply the overseas territories with vaccines is firm, and we will get supplies proportionate to our population size and the amount of vaccines that are available in the UK. And as before, those vaccines will be supplied free of charge. So I'm very pleased to announce that the third consignment of vaccines is due to arrive on island on the next BA flight, which is the 11th of February. This time we've been able to secure slightly more doses than the first and second consignment, so the next consignment will consist of around 15,000 doses. It's just worth reminding ourselves that each vial of the vaccines has 5 doses, but you can actually get 6 or 7 doses out of each vial of 5. So we got 9,750 in the first batch, but that's actually about 11,500. So in total, we got 23,000 doses in the first 2 batches. This third consignment will take us to a total of about 38,000 doses, which is getting close to 20,000 people, equivalent to 40% of the adult population. So this is a really strong signal of support from the UK for Cayman and the overseas territories, and my office remains in touch with London about further supplies on the next 2 BA flights, which are at the end of February and a further one around the middle of March. Of course, globally, vaccine supply still remains challenging, and the politics around access to vaccines, as everyone will be aware, is very sensitive. So in Cayman, we are doing very well given the continuing health crisis in the UK and elsewhere, including actually in some of the overseas territories, which do have significant community transmission and in a couple of cases deaths as well. We will continue to be sent the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, most likely for the next 2 to 3 shipments, but we may be provided with AstraZeneca at some point, depending on the supplies. And it's worth noting now that vaccines are being rolled out to millions of people across the world with no serious side effects or complications. And here in the Cayman Islands, that has also been the case. The UK has now rolled out 10.5 million vaccine doses. The US is up to 33 million, over 100 million globally. Vaccines are safe, they're effective, they were trialled on many tens of thousands of people, and they've gone through rigorous testing. And they've been given a green light by highly respected regulators in many different countries. So we can be confident that they are safe. And as the Premier and Dr. Lee set out, we want to get to that 90% target of over 60s before we look at further opening up. And I also applaud the efforts made to get to that target and the role of HSA and everybody. It is going really well. But it's vitally important that everybody, when offered, does take the vaccine. And as well as protecting you individually, this is the way we protect our community, particularly our elderly and vulnerable. And I recognise some people still do have concerns about the vaccine, and I respect people who have genuine concerns. But I do believe they can be allayed, and I do urge everyone to go to official, trustworthy sources for information. There's plenty of excellent factual information on the Cayman Islands government website. And please don't be taken in by misleading, sensational stories on social media, and also think carefully about what you circulate. I just want to say a word about the new variants, because I've been speaking to a lot of people in the UK about this, and I understand it's causing concern and anxiety globally, and currently there is not enough data available to understand everything about the new variants. But there does seem to be reasonable confidence that the vaccines will still be effective. And the signals are that the vaccines, even with the new variants, will stop people getting seriously ill or dying. That gives us real hope. But until more data is available, we do need to remain vigilant. And I therefore fully support the government's cautious and careful approach over the coming weeks until we have clearer information. I do, however, think it is superb news that an Oxford University study has demonstrated that AstraZeneca vaccine stops an individual infecting others with COVID as well as protecting the individual. And that's the first study to show that. It still needs to be peer-reviewed, but it's a highly promising development. And again, I do believe it gives us real confidence that vaccines are the way out of this pandemic. And of course, the development of vaccines continues to be an incredible scientific advance, and UK science is playing a really pivotal role in that. So to conclude, we remain blessed that we can largely enjoy our normal lives, and I want to thank everyone across the islands for what they're doing to make that possible. And again, I want to underline that the processes for incoming travellers continue to work well, but I urge everyone coming into our islands to follow the protocols to help keep everybody safe. The vaccine rollout does give us much hope and confidence for the future, despite the emergence of the new strains. But I do urge everyone to please take the vaccine when invited to do so. It is the Cayman-kind thing to do for everyone in our community. And we really are all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We now go to the Honourable Minister of Finance, Mr. William Taggart.
Thank you, Donna, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be joining you and the panel this afternoon to provide an update on the country's finances. But to help us to better appreciate today's news, it is, I think, important for us to consider some context. When I was elected and joined the government in 2013, the country was still dealing with the impact of the 2008 global recession and an economy that was struggling to grow at about 1% and some 10.5% of Caymanians unemployed. Tourism numbers were the lowest they had been in 10 years or more, and much of the large development projects that had stopped. The construction sector was hurting and small businesses were struggling. If we consider where this country has moved to by the end of 2019, I think we can all be proud of what the past two governments have achieved along with the businesses and families of Cayman. Before the impact of COVID-19 early last year, we had a Cayman economy that was the best in the region. Arguably, it is still the same today. Growth averaged over 3% from 2014 to 2019, and in Caymanian unemployment was below 5%, the lowest in many, many years. Tourism had grown by record numbers, while financial services grew at almost 4% on average. Construction and development sector was helping drive jobs, and in 2019 alone, there were 750 projects were approved with a combined total value of over $890 million. It is several of those projects that have recommenced after the long lockdown of 2020 that has helped and is helping to keep our local economy alive. And happily, even with the backdrop of a global pandemic and challenging economic times, those investments are continuing to come to Cayman and bode well for our future recovery. It has been the political leadership and strong financial stewardship of this government, and the previous one I might add, that has provided the business sector with the confidence to invest and fuel the economic growth that created opportunities for thousands of new jobs for Caymanians. Continued investment is critical to the rebuilding of our economy, and investment will continue as long as the business sector remains confident in the political and financial leadership government is providing. We have, over 2 terms now, demonstrated fiscal leadership by creating substantial surpluses that were used to reduce debt by more than 1/2, rebuilt our cash reserves, and funded large infrastructure projects from cash without increasing taxation or the debt burden. I am not aware of any past administration that can lay claim to such significant accomplishments. But this administration can. And we did it with sound planning, judgment, and leadership. And that sound planning ensured that when COVID-19 hit, we were well placed and prepared financially to weather the storm, even with our borders closed. That is the same planning, judgment, and leadership that prepared the country financially for an economic downturn that helped guide these islands through the worst of 2020 and is helping to bring confidence to our prospects in 2021. As we continue to navigate through the global pandemic, I'm happy to be able to report today that we are in a much better place than we anticipated at the start of this pandemic. So let's go to the preliminary numbers and results for the period ended 31st of December. I'm pleased to report that the overall 2020 deficit will be substantially less than the 168 million core government deficit that had previously been estimated in mid-2020. Preliminary results indicate that central government itself is expected to close the 2020 financial year with an operating deficit of some $50.1 million. Adding in non-core government entities or taking those into effect and potential other adjustments that could come, could increase this to $75 million. But this will be clearer in the coming weeks, and I hasten to remind you, these are preliminary numbers. Again, against the backdrop of an earlier estimated $168 million deficit, then a $50 to $75 million deficit leaves us in a far better position than we were before. What also leaves us in a good position is that at the end of 2020, we had some $449 million in the bank. This is the result of the work done over the past 2 terms to secure the country's finances, and it is this buffer that has given us the space to keep health and safety at the forefront of our decision making rather than money. So let me repeat. We ended 2020 with $440 million in the bank and a much smaller deficit, which we are forecasting between $50 to $75 million for the year. And I know you will be interested in some of the gross figures, so let me share those with you. Preliminary operating revenues for the year ended December 31st. Actual numbers are $758,867,000 versus an original budget of $824,814,000. Operating and financing expenditures are at $809,005,000 versus a budget of $760,809. That leaves us with an operating deficit of $50.1 million versus an original budget, not the reforecast one, an original budget for core government of $64.005 million. I would also add that our debt at the end of the year was $249 million, and we still have access to the $403 million US dollar line of credit if it is necessary to access it. Now, some of the reasons why the deficit is likely to be, the deficit isn't likely to be as grave as was initially projected was the great performance of a few of government's revenue categories when compared to the original revenue projections for the 2020 fiscal year. For example, stamp duties on land transfers. This category exceeded its initial 2020 projections by $20.6 million. Mutual fund administrators' licenses, and this category exceeded its initial revenue projection by $5.9 million. And other revenues had a favorable variance of $4.2 million, made up of $1.7 million with respect to sales of supplies and other items to jurisdictions in the region to combat COVID-19 and to other local on-island healthcare facilities, and $2.5 million of revenues from the air bridge flights. The improvement in the deficit also came about because certain expenditure categories have incurred fewer costs at the end of 2020 than initially budgeted, particularly for personnel costs and supplies and consumables. Collectively, these accounted for savings of approximately $43 million. It is very important to note that core government's preliminary $50.1 million deficit figure takes account of a significant level of COVID-19 expenditures that were incurred in 2020. The preliminary figures for COVID-19 expenses incurred to the 31st of December 2020 is approximately $65.4 million, which consists of some $33 million for health-related costs, including testing kits, PPE, and quarantine costs. The remaining $32.4 million was used primarily to support families and businesses impacted by the pandemic. Whilst our local economy continues to perform well, we know there are many in our tourism sector who are still suffering due to our borders being closed. Some time ago, government had determined that if our finances allowed us, we would look again at the assistance that could be provided to those displaced tourism workers. So today, I'm very pleased to announce that we will be increasing the tourism stipend from $1,000 a month to $1,500 a month. This increase will come into effect in February this month and will continue until June 2021. This increase to the stipend is another step in helping our tourism workers to weather the economic and financial hardships caused by COVID-19. As I close, I take the opportunity to thank my cabinet and caucus colleagues, the Deputy Governor, and all civil servants who have worked so diligently and tirelessly to keep our country ticking and are continuing to deliver for our citizens during this very difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister McTaggart. We now go to Minister Seymour.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us as we make these important announcements, updating you about our plans of COVID-19. Please know that we continue to work tirelessly behind the scenes to bring relief and assistance to our people. As my usual in Scripture, 1 John 3:18, my little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. I am pleased today to also be announcing further assistance to displaced tourism workers, this time to assist with a new round of health insurance premium payments assistance program. As you know, following the onset of the COVID-19 disease in March last year, the government undertook various measures to minimize the threat of the virus in the Cayman Islands. Those included closing our borders, which had a direct impact in terms of economic activities throughout the islands, but specifically in tourism and hospitality industry. From April until June last year, the Ministry of Health, in conjunction with the Health Insurance Commission, offered an initial assistance program to those persons who needed help paying their health insurance premiums. During that period, some 1,250 people received assistance at a cost of approximately $400,000. For some time now, we have been considering how best to continue with health insurance assistance, and I am pleased to confirm that the Ministry and the Health Insurance Commission, together with the approved insurance companies, have agreed to this new program focused on assisting those in the tourism and hospitality industries who have suffered job loss, and severely reduced income from their businesses. As is the case with those receiving benefits from the tourism stipend, those seeking health insurance premium assistance will need to apply. Application should be made through the Health Insurance Commission. Persons may contact the Health Insurance Commission via email at hic@gov.ky or by phone on 946-2084 for additional details. The application form may be downloaded from the Commission's website at dhrs.gov.ky, or hard copies are available at the lobby on the ground floor of the Government Administration Building. The deadline for receipt of the applications is 12th of February, and the program is being offered from March the 1st to June 30th of this year. The Health Insurance Commission has consulted with the eight approved insurers who have pledged their support to the Premium Payment Assistance Program, and Cabinet has given its consent. As you can see from the development of this second phase of the assistance program, the health and well-being of all remain the government's highest priority. This program will once again assist those employees in the tourism and hospitality industries by helping them maintain their insurance coverage. I am pleased once again to see the Ministry of Health, through the Health Insurance Commission, deliver on my vision of providing assistance to the members of our community with payments of their health insurance premium during the months of March, April, May, and June. I thank the Premier and the government for assisting with this vision. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Minister Seymour. We'd like to now call on the Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, the Honourable Joseph Hew.
Thank you, Donna.
You're brave.
Let me first say good evening to everyone, afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us. And
Minister, you sure you don't want my seat?
no, I'm good. I can. And let me apologize for not joining my colleagues at the head table, but it's very difficult with this injury to sit quietly and still for any period of time. Let me also take the opportunity to thank those who have reached out over the last few weeks, wishing me well and a speedy recovery, and I'm happy to say that I am well on my way to recovery and should be back on the road in just a few short weeks. Not on the football field, but certainly back on the road. It is certainly my pleasure today to provide some updates from the Ministry of Commerce and the efforts being made through the Cayman Islands Center for Business Development. These efforts extend to our small and micro businesses and our entrepreneurs across these three islands. Just to remind you, our main priorities at this time are to provide a wide range of support to micro and small business owners and entrepreneurs. These include access to finance, technical assistance, as well as advice and training. Also, to identify and provide special support to businesses that have the systems in place that will put them in a position to aid in the economy's recovery. Before I announce additional government support being provided for micro and small businesses, I'd like to provide an update of the relief efforts that the government instituted thus far to assist the micro and small businesses disrupted as a result of the pandemic. In phase one of the government's micro and small business grants program, 1,432 businesses benefited from approximately $4.3 million. And in phase two of the program, 370 businesses were approved for amounts ranging from $6,000 to $20,000. Successful applicants are currently being processed and are set to benefit from a total funding of $4.5 million. This is quite an exercise, so we ask those who have been notified that they were successful in the grants to be patient as we process these payments. Additionally, 29 loans have been dispersed under the joint CIDB Cayman Islands Loan Interest Scheme, with a value of over $1 million. And finally, technical assistance was provided to 44 small businesses under this loan scheme. This afternoon, I'm pleased to announce that Cabinet recently approved a one-time payment of $3,000 as a stipend to business owners who applied to phase two of the government's micro and small business grants and who were not successful. This is a single payment that will be made per a business owner, irrespective of the number of businesses owned and/or the number of applications submitted in previous phases of the program. So I must emphasize that business owners who received a grant under phase two of the program will not be eligible to benefit from this stipend. Some key points to be made about the payments of the stipend are that the beneficiaries will not be asked to submit any new applications or supporting documents. Documents submitted in support of previous applications will be used as proof of operations for these applicants, and therefore, no action would be required on the part of the beneficiaries. Deposits of $3,000 will be made. No action will be required on the part of the beneficiaries, and the deposits of $3,000 will be made to the account numbers of the business owners by electronic funds transfer. It is anticipated that the number of business owners who will qualify to receive this disbursement will be over 450. The total funds committed from the government is just over $1.3 million. In addition to that support, my ministry is set to officially open a business incubator at the Center for Business Development on March 24th. The business incubator will house startups and business owners who do not currently have a workspace from which to operate. We expect that this will benefit up to 20 micro and small business owners and entrepreneurs at any one time. The residential space will be made free of charge for up to 2 years, and in addition to the space, they will have access to laptops and other office equipment, business advisors right there at the location, and a special advisory panel consisting of legal, accounting, and other business professionals. A major benefit of the business will be operating from the incubator is that the advisors at the center, as well as other business mentors, will provide strategic business development guidance to support them to innovate and to grow. We anticipate that with the stipends, the business incubator, as well as other relief measures government has provided to micro and small businesses, they will be in a better position to navigate these unusual times. In closing, I just want to thank my colleagues in the government for their support to this very important sector of the industry, of the economy, and the team at the Center for Business Development for all that they have accomplished since their opening just a few short months ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Hugh. We'd like to now call on members of the media with questions, beginning with Reshma from the Compass.
Before you go, I'll ask you a question.
Sure.
I will make you stand up again.
You want to come back?
Careful.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Minister Hugh, just when will this payment be made to the business owners? Because I didn't hear a payment date.
They will, as soon as the funds are available to the center, we will disperse them. As I said, these are persons who were not successful in phase 2, so we have all of their information already. We've already vetted these companies to ensure that they are legitimate, and we have their banking information. So we will make the transactions as soon as the funds are available through Treasury to us.
Okay, and how long do you anticipate that process, the vetting,
The vetting process is done, so it's just a matter of processing them through Treasury, so it should be a few short weeks.
Okay, that's all for you.
Thank you.
All right, my first questions are for Dr. Lee. Find all my questions. Afternoon, Dr. Lee.
Afternoon.
First of all, do you have a figure for the overall amount of doses we have available right now until we get the next shipment?
Not an exact figure, but it's clearly something that I've been watching because we need to make sure that we're always able to give our second dose, and we are only going as far as making sure that we know that the next tranche has been confirmed that the delivery is going to come before we proceed. So I'm working on the basis that we need to give everybody their second dose. Please be reassured in that regard.
Okay. Now, we have a batch coming on the 11th of February. Do you have a plan for a quota of how many doses you're going to be issuing every week or per day? Do you have a plan outlined like that?
We are currently making sure that public health can match the demand that's there, and I think we're more or less doing it fairly well. We have fairly consistently been giving out an average of 400 doses a day across all the different sectors, and that's the figure in which I'm working on. Clearly, if the numbers begin to step up, we could step that up. I mean, Public Health and Nurse Brown and her team have advised they could quite easily go up to 1,000 a day at the airport, should it be required. We also have to balance that with the fact that the staff, this is going to be something that's going to run for several months, so we want to make sure that everybody gets the right breaks and so on as we work through the program, as well as allow the flow of vaccines to continue from the United Kingdom. We wouldn't want to use them all up now for exactly the reason with your opening question about making sure everybody can get their 2 doses.
Okay, now I want to talk a little about COVAX because Cayman signed up, and earlier this week, PAHO announced they had issued letters to participating countries for the arrival of their vaccines. Cayman was not on that list. Was that deliberate? Can you tell us about that?
So Cayman has also received a letter from COVAX in which it noted that we have declined to take the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccines. The reasons we've declined to take that is that we are getting a very good supply. We know that many countries around us have not had any access to vaccines whatsoever, so we're on a very unique position and special position for which we're very grateful to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom to be in. For that reason, we knew we were going to have a good supply of either of those two vaccines. We opted at the time to not take those. That doesn't mean we're not in the scheme, we remain in the scheme, but it does also allow that, although we're a small country, it allows those vaccines that we have released, because we're not taking them, to be distributed amongst other countries, and we know they are in a really short supply.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee. I don't know if this may be a question for you or for the Premier to answer, but the announcement with the changes to the quarantining protocols, for residents who have already received the 2 doses, will that apply to them immediately, or is there a set date that these restrictions are going to kick in?
I don't know the answer to the question. I was going to have a quick word afterwards. My feeling would be anybody that's already had the first dose would need to have their second dose. It would be something we would want to make sure they completed their course. We've started on a process, so it would only be reasonable to finish that, but thereafter that no further people who were not ordinarily and legally resident in the Cayman Islands would be able to access the program.
Okay. Thank you. I have some questions for the panel now. For the Premier, you talked about the border reopening and the plan to get that 5,000 people. Do you have a timeline that you estimate that we will hit that target so that we can look at reopening?
I believe on the current trajectory, we should hit there at the end of this month. But again, that depends on people from that demographic coming forward to get the vaccine.
Now, we are at 65. Do you think that's a good rate to be at right now, given the projections that you were working with, or were you expecting that there would have been a faster uptake?
No, I think we were all quite pleased with how well it's going. There were initial concerns, and of course we're still, the last push is usually the hardest in anything, in any endeavor, but because some people are still requiring convincing. But what I am getting anecdotally is that the more, as I would expect, the more people that are vaccinated, the more people that can give a testimonial about it to their peers, the more likely it is, I believe, that people are going to come on board. We are making some extra efforts, and I thank Dr. Lee for his willingness to do that, to talking to, for instance, the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Conference, in other words, the ministers, and to the Cayman Ministers Association as well, because the church plays a huge role in this community, which is good. And we have talked to them, Dr. Lee has talked to them, gone through the science of the vaccine in the hope that that helps to break down some of the obstacles, some of the resistance by some people within churches to taking the vaccine. And the demographic of churches tends to be on the upper end of the age group, which is why it's even more important that we actually are able to target that particular demographic.
Okay. Now, the World Cup qualifiers are coming up next month, and teams are scheduled to travel to Cayman. Are there any procedures in place to accommodate those players or for that event, or have you looked at that event even coming off at all?
I haven't been involved in any discussions, not aware of any discussions that have been going on. I'm not saying they're not going on, I'm just saying I'm unaware of them, so I can't answer the question.
Okay, fair enough. Now, I've had a couple questions come in, like residents who've already gotten 2 doses who are overseas and want to come home. Will they be allowed to, or will they have to quarantine?
For the time being, yes, until we hit that 90% target, yes.
Okay.
And even then, they're going to still have to quarantine for 10 days. So,
And of course, naturally, there will still be questions about people who don't fit the categories. If you will be extending the categories of who will be opening, who will be allowed in, because right now we have specific categories of people who are allowed in. Are you looking at expanding those categories anytime soon with the travel restrictions?
well, we'll certainly will look at it again once we hit the 90%. But again, we don't expect that we're going to have an onslaught of tourists coming, because we're going to still require at a minimum for the time being a 10-day quarantine. Most people who come here to visit as tourists, at least historically, stay for 5 days. The average stay is 5 days. So we're conscious that this is not likely to affect tourism numbers. So we're not managing for that prospect. As I think everybody's aware, things are changing daily around the world with respect to these issues, and so it's a constantly moving landscape, and we have to constantly adjust what we're doing in our planning to bear in mind new variants, developments with respect to the vaccine. Good news, such as we got yesterday about the AstraZeneca. Bad news, as we got a few days before that about some vaccines not being so effective in relation to certain variants. So, every single day we make assessments and adjustments in our thinking and our planning to take into account circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
So we can't, my point is, while I know there's criticisms about it, we really can't plan too far ahead, because it's changing so fast that we just have to do the best we can given the particular circumstances. And in another 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we may well come here and say something significantly different if there are changes. And one of the things that I am confident about, simply because I see how these things happen, is that the current shortage of vaccines available globally is going to go away in a rather short period of time as more and more are approved. It'll be like it was with the test kits. Initially, they were gold. And only very few countries were able to get the quantities they needed. Now, no one talks about test kits and their shortage, because everybody has access to them. That's what's going to happen with the vaccine.
Okay. In terms of the home isolation program, we've seen that there were quarantine breaches before, and now we have the tests coming back with UK variant being found in Cayman. Are you looking at making any changes to the home quarantining monitoring process? Are you increasing the surveillance? What are you doing in relation to that to ensure that we don't have any breaches and this doesn't get out into the community?
Well, they're constantly refining the way they go about this, because this was a learning experience for everyone. But I think our systems are in place now, are very robust. There will always be glitches. As long as there's humans involved, there'll be human error. But I think we've done remarkably well. And I should say, based on what I've heard from the team, since a certain court case, we don't have too many instances of breaches being reported.
Okay. Minister McTaggart,
Yes, ma'am.
you made an announcement with the increase in the stipend. Can you say how much that's going to cost us?
Yes, I can. It will cost us about an extra $1.5 million each month. So for the 5-month period, it'll be $7.5 million.
Okay, thank you. And Minister Seymour, you talked about the health insurance premiums. Have the issues that were plaguing that initiative last year been resolved? I know there were some problems with the payments and workers not being able to access that coverage. Can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Reshma. As said earlier, the Health Insurance Commission and the ministry met with all 8 insurance providers, and all of the issues that that they had previously have been ironed out, and we have worked on a mechanism where it's almost like a prepayment, and they're fine with the cycle that we've agreed on.
Okay. Governor, one final question, because I just remembered. The regiment training team is on island, and you recently had discussions with them. There have been some questions about the regiment and so forth. Can you provide us with any updates on what's happening with the training and the plan going forward?
Sure. So there is a military team here, and they're in quarantine for 2 weeks, just like anybody else coming into the island. So once they come out of quarantine, they will do training for the second cohort of 50 reservists. So it will follow exactly the same system we had for the training the first cohort. So the reservists will go through 2 weeks of very intense training, and then there'll be a passing out parade. And at that point, we will have 110 trained officers and reservists, putting us in a really, really strong position moving forward, both this year and next year.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Reshma. We're going to now move to Wendy from CNS for questions for the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can I start with Dr. Lee? Thank you. Dr. Lee, we get every single day lots and lots and lots and lots of inquiries about different types of statistics, and it's quite frustrating. And from everything from how many people have been vaccinated on Cayman Brac, how many people are in home isolation on Cayman Brac, how many people are in this group of people due to be vaccinated, how many people are non-residents that have gotten vaccinated all the time. I was just wondering, rather than me asking you 100 statistical questions, whether you could, in say once a week, put some of these figures online so that we can just direct people to a place on the website where you're putting these figures. Is that possible?
If you could make another one of me, maybe. But unfortunately, that is the issue. We have only so much human resources.
Right.
They are really attending to the job at hand, which is working out vaccination programs as well as providing results and keeping the country safe with the quarantine. And that is an absolutely full-time, more than full-time job, Wendy. And everybody is applying themselves. On Saturday, the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief of Human Resources from the HSA, senior staff from the HSA are going out to the vaccination sites because they need hands on the ground, and there are limits to what we can do, and we're prioritizing, unfortunately, the job at hand. And we endeavor to give you the figures when we can, but there is a limit to how much we can do, unfortunately.
One of the reasons why I think we get so many questions is because people seem to be concerned that people are jumping the queue, and that we don't know whether people are jumping the queue because we don't have these statistics to say we expect that there are 4,000 people over the age of 70 that we haven't yet vaccinated, or there are 6,000 frontline workers that will need to be vaccinated 1 and 2 doses over the next. So it's things like that people are getting worried about. Maybe you could just reassure, because one of the things that keeps coming up is how many people who are not actually resident, and the Premier's just said that they're supposed to be at the back of the queue, because I remember you saying previously at another press briefing that they could, because we want everyone who's staying here for any period to be vaccinated, but they shouldn't be jumping the queue. I think we all know that people have jumped the queue. So can you talk about the priority and the importance of ensuring that people are not jumping the queue? Or if indeed you're now thinking about, well, let's open it up anyway, as some countries are now discussing.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly why it was announced today that we would be restricting a vaccination program to legally and ordinarily resident. I think a lot of countries have all faced this. The people who've had the vaccine earliest have all faced this. I'm sure you know, Wendy, that Bermuda faced the same problem. The other issue is that we calculated the census data based on the people the census data is based on everybody who was present on the island in 2010, and we've used those figures to calculate our proportions now. And that census data wouldn't have checked what your immigration status is. It doesn't count hotels, but it does count everybody else that's here, and nobody is currently in the hotels. I can't really give you any more information than that, other than we have sewn up that loophole, which we saw was there, and we've attended to it now, and we'll do so going forward.
So,
but just to develop the point a little bit, firstly, there aren't huge thousands of people over 70. There's only about 2,500 in that group in total.
right.
So it's not a very large number, but we do absolutely want to make sure that we haven't disenfranchised anybody over 60 who, for whatever reason, because they can't get access, because they can't leave their home, or they don't know who to help them to get to the vaccination centre, or because they haven't had enough information. As has been mentioned, we have a very substantial campaign to try to reach those people, to make sure that they've had the right information, that they can make the informed decisions and get access to the vaccinations which we want them to get access to, which is a relatively scarce commodity at the moment.
Okay, I understand. On the other side of this, some countries are now discussing about maybe we shouldn't be prioritising just elderly people anyway, because it's actually young people that do the spreading. But obviously we don't have it in our community, so that wouldn't necessarily make much sense. But it did appear yesterday that there were only around 80 new doses distributed. So that might suggest that the over 60s and the vulnerable people and the vulnerable workers section is more or less exhausted, and you've more or less done them all, and they're all waiting second doses.
That's not the case at all.
It's
just that those, if you look at the categories that are available to turn up to the vaccination sites, it has been restricted to certain groups, and so actually we have been making sure that everybody that comes for their second doses, because we know that there are several hundred every day for those that need to come down. Exactly. So on Saturday we're again opening it up to the new stage 2 group A, which was very successful last Saturday and will be very successful today again, and you'll see another jump in the first doses.
Okay. I think I'm done with you. It was just that. Sorry. Shame back figures, but just have to keep. I'm just going to give people your number.
I'm very good at blocking numbers.
I think that's. Oh, actually, you didn't give us the test results, but I presume you can do those. You can do that later.
They've been released already through GIS. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm moving on. I'm moving on now to the Premier. Yes. Just to clarify, the target was the end of March, but now the target might be the end of February, possibly, but the target is a different thing now. So it's like, whatever the date is, it must be 90% of the over 70s.
Correct.
And it will be 10-day quarantine.
Over 60s.
Sorry, over 60. 10-day quarantine now. Was the plan in March to remove the quarantine altogether?
Well, again, as I say, we're constantly thinking this thing through. What's really thrown a major wrench into our original thinking is the development of all of these variants and the unknown about them. So we are being more conservative now than initially because of that, principally because of that.
Following on, we've had a lot of inquiries about this issue of once you've had the vaccines. I think you've made it clear, but I just want to clarify that these were always propositions that once we reach a certain point, we would require people coming to have had the vaccine. There is some misunderstanding, I think, in the community that people think once they've had the vaccine that they can now travel freely and come and go.
I know, I get it 4 or 5 times a day. So yes, many people believe that this is a passport, that once you've had this, you can go anywhere in the world. But unfortunately, the situation in the world doesn't currently allow that. When the R rate, or reproduction rate of the virus, falls significantly in what I call our source jurisdictions, the US and the UK, then perhaps we can look again at whether or not we can lower that 10-day quarantine to something like 5, but at rates of, I'm not sure what today's is, but somewhere around 0.8 recently, there's just no way we can do that. the chances of someone coming from there having it is just too high.
Thank you. Mr. McTaggart, the criteria, I'm not sure whether it would be you actually, because you've just given them the money, it's up to them to do the policy. I was just wondering whether it's the Premier.
He knows the policy too, you know.
Yeah, well, basically the criteria, we've had a lot of people suggest that on the one hand, people are saying people in tourism are not getting enough help, but then there are other people saying, well, they've gone into different work. What's the criteria? Is it going to be means tested, or is everybody, if you were in tourism and you lost your job, even if you've got another job now, so is there any kind of means testing going to be going on for the increased stipend?
No,
Go ahead.
okay. This stipend relates to those that we've already approved. So we're simply increasing it from the 1,000 to 1,500.
Yeah, but that's the point that they're making, is that in the period of time, some of these people have got jobs.
Right. Well, we're not going through a new exercise now to take it away from people who are currently receiving it. We all know living in Cayman, $1,000 a month or $1,500 a month, you can't live on that, really. Although some people do or have to, but we've always understood that this was an assistance to people, not a substitute for them getting, a regular salary.
So in other words, they shouldn't be penalised because they might get another little job. Yeah.
We're not going to do that.
So it's a flat fee. Minister of Health, the insurance. There's now a gap for a lot of people because obviously they had it, then it stopped, and now it's going to start again. Do you see any trouble in that situation? So that means that there's actually people that have gone through a period of time where they haven't had health cover, or is that's it? They're not going to be obligated to pay it back to their. Do you understand what I mean? Like that they will be indebted to their insurance company. Do you understand my position on that? If you can explain that.
Truly understand. And before I answer that about the indebted, I just wanted to reiterate in terms of the question you asked about the vaccinated persons, and if you get a vaccine, if you need to quarantine, etc. That question comes up a lot. What I would say to people is people are going to still have a need to travel. It's better to be vaccinated if they have to travel, even though you have to quarantine when you come back. I just wanted to make that point clear. But the point that we want to get to is that if you're vaccinated and you've done your PCR test 72 hours prior, then coming to the Cayman Islands, you wouldn't have to quarantine. That's the point I think most countries want to get to. But we're not there yet because of us trying to protect the most vulnerable, etc. In terms of the health insurance question that you asked, we discussed that. We exhausted that discussion. What we must take into consideration is that once a person's premiums have stopped being paid, then that means that there's no coverage. So that's supposed to stop after 30 days. Depends on the relationship you have with your health insurance provider. But the question came up as to if we were going to cover from November last year, or if you're going to start at January 1st. That is a situation that is fraught with problems, and there's no way in the world that we could actually vet that properly. What would really happen is that I don't think any insurer would have paid any claim for anyone who wasn't paying their premium. So that was a question, and I think we passed that. Obviously, persons would have loved to have free money for months backdating.
Yeah.
But that is not where we agreed to go. This was the March 1st date was an agreed date by the insurers, the Health Insurance Commission, and the Ministry, because that was less problems. Now, I'm not saying that because a person, we may have very well had persons that had to go to the hospital during this time while they had no premium. If those persons have had problems that we can confirm that were during this period while they were not insured, most definitely the Health Insurance Commission will take those inquiries on, investigate them, and we will make a decision on whether we will.
So if they
own
owe the hospital
responsibility
money
for that premium, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So that is a consideration.
Okay. So hospital debt will be under consideration.
Yeah.
You said 1250, I think. You said people had been assisted in the first batch.
Yes.
Then when we came back here recently, you said you didn't think there was that many people anymore that were missing it. So obviously there's been some recalculation
Well,
about that. So have you got an idea roughly how many people we're talking about?
Well, the first tranche of this, or the first 3 months in April to June last year, it was a different set of worker that we were actually targeting, because at that time almost everybody was out of a job. It was only the financial industry that was actually. Now that most of those have gone back to work, we're actually targeting the known tourism and
Hospitality.
yeah, the tourism and hospitality industry that we know has the borders are still closed. So we know those numbers, and we got those numbers from all the stipends that are being paid. So it was easy for us. I think it's some 1898.
So it's actually more than before.
It's actually more.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, it's going to be about, we're expecting to spend about $2 million over the March 1st to June.
Just one more thing. Some people, from what I could gather, like looking into all of this, is that people have been reluctant to come forward because it's against the law not to have health insurance. And so, can you reassure people that there's going to be no sort of retrospective punishments for them, maybe going for some people nearly a year now without any insurance?
Yeah. Well, I've spoken to the Health Insurance Commission, and persons don't have to worry about that. We want to ensure that persons, that we're thankful that we had no deaths, and that we're also thankful that it wasn't a situation where persons couldn't get health care. We're not going to use that against them, and definitely won't be supported by this government.
And does this have to come through the employees, or can it also come through the employer if he's got a small group of people that he hasn't been able to do? It can be either or.
Well, it's
the applications.
It's a situation where we want to hear from the employee, because we want to ensure.
Okay.
It's a vetting process, and we want to ensure that that all ducks are lined up.
Fair enough. Sorry about that. There was a lot of questions about that. But it's just been there's a lot been things.
No, it's very important.
I have a question for the governor. The issue, and maybe the Premier, the issue of breaches. We're still waiting on all of these alleged breaches that have never been addressed. We've heard about another one today. I hear about them every couple of weeks. There's definitely another one today. I think people are a bit frustrated. I know it's not happening an awful lot, and it's obvious that we're not rife with COVID, so we know it's not really breaching anything. But people are very worried about it, and I can't stop these constant messages coming through about, it's happening here, I see the police here and I see the police there. So these breaches are occurring, but just perhaps you could speak to what's going on with the investigations that seem to take so long for...
Yeah, no, I do understand that, and I think not these cases, a lot of them are not straightforward. It's often quite complex and it's quite difficult. People's situations are very different. So I think we just have to be patient and put our faith in the system, and if there is enough evidence there to move to prosecution, that will happen. It will go to the DPP, and then we'll move into the wider system. So I think there's only very, very small number of cases that we've been concerned about. So I just would urge people not to sort of make this issue out to be worse than it really is. And as the Premier said, and we've all said, our systems are working. We've done incredibly well, so people just need to have some confidence in the fact that the systems and processes are working.
Okay, thank you. And now for the politics. Will there be a meeting of the Legislative Assembly before the Parliament is prorogued?
I don't know.
Were you planning one?
No.
Because I'd seen at least one bill has gone out.
You'll probably see some more. that go out so that people have more time to consider these things.
But they'd fall away anyway after March.
Yeah.
The law would have to fall away.
Yeah, but the issue doesn't fall away. I mean,
Okay.
the issue that the bills are dealing with doesn't fall away. So one of the complaints most of the time is that there isn't adequate consultation
Right.
time. So I'm saying is that as bills get prepared, we'll put them out for consultation in the usual way.
So separate and apart then, to deal with the no confidence motion, are you willing to hold a special meeting? And would the two
Well,
ministers on the panel also
but
support the
that-
holding of a special
that really
meeting?
is that really is a matter.
motion?
That really, I've made my position clear 4 or 5 times. As I've seen you write extensively about it this week. So you know what my position is.
I know
my
what your position is.
My position
but
hasn't
would you-
changed.
I haven't asked. I did ask you, but you didn't answer me via WhatsApp whether you would hold a special meeting for it.
But I'm saying that's not for us. That really is a matter for the opposition. If they want a special
No, but you
meeting,
could hold one if you wanted to.
we can hold any meeting. I'm saying we're not planning any meeting. I've just said that.
Okay.
So if they want a special meeting to deal with that, then they need to do what the standing orders require them to do. But unfortunately for them, I'm told, there's only 2 members of the opposition who are prepared to proceed with this matter, being the leader of the opposition and the member from Northside. So they need to get some solidarity amongst themselves before I've said what the government's position is on this matter. So before they try to trigger a meeting of the House, they've got to get their own House in order.
Okay, but you have no plans for one for just general government business anyway between now.
Well, no, we never know
Unless something comes up.
we never know what's going to happen. But we have ticked almost every box on the legislative front that we needed to do. There's 7 weeks left to run before this term expires. The government's got lots of things to do, which we are getting on with.
I've got one more
This
question
press
for you.
conference is an example of
Just
some of the
quickly,
things that
want
we've
just
done.
comment from the other 2 ministers whether you would support a meeting or no for this motion. Would you support a meeting to debate the motion and then
A special meeting.
to
No.
remove Mr. Bush?
No,
From his speaker's chair.
I'm with the Premier on
Okay.
the position.
When I don't speak on behalf of my government if I don't know what my government's position is.
Yeah, I just
You
think
really
that
don't need to
people would like
poll my
hear from them
ministers
too.
individually. So
The final issue is the EU situation, which is it seems to be sort of developing. I know you'd said there was some mix-up about what was what, but specifically the redefining of the blacklist. Do you have any concerns about that?
of course we do. But what's been announced recently is really not much of a surprise to those people who are paying attention to this, because the EU's end game, certainly the hawks within the EU, France and Germany in particular, is that they want there to be a sort of international policy that all low tax or no tax jurisdictions are harmful to the world economy. That's where they're trying to get. I had that said to me directly a couple of years ago when I was on one of the missions there in Paris and in Berlin. I mean, they're absolutely adamant that no tax and low tax jurisdictions are harmful, in their view, harmful to the world economy, and in particular to the EU economy. So what we saw, the resolution of the European Parliament, is a reflection of that. So this is going to be a major challenge going forward. And this is not a challenge that Cayman or any other country can fix by legislation unless we decide to adopt direct taxation. So the approach has to continue to be what it has been, except that we need to ramp it up. And I've announced recently at the Chamber of Commerce that the government is pressing ahead with the opening of international offices, the first one planned for Brussels, again as part of our overall strategy to dealing with this increased threat to our principal industry, which is financial services. But this is my assessment, this is unlikely to happen quickly. The resolution of the European Parliament, the closest analogy I can find is it is akin to a private member's motion in our Parliament, where it expresses the will of Parliament, but it has no binding effect. So what has got to happen for this to actually occur is for this expression of the will of Parliament to get translated into part of the overall European policy, which is carried out by the European Commission. So I'm not for a moment downplaying the seriousness of it. I'm just saying is that you're not going to wind up with an automatic situation where in a couple of months there's some new blacklist to which Cayman and other jurisdictions get added. There's one thing, and this is favorable in this particular instance. One thing that you can rely on with the European Union is massive bureaucracy. And everything takes forever to get done. But the challenges ahead are going to continue to be great. We've proven, I think, and I don't mean this government alone, I mean the Cayman Islands has proven over the last 40 years that we are more than up to the task of navigating successfully those challenges, and our financial services industry continues to go from strength to strength, all the critics and all the challenges notwithstanding.
Thank you.
All right, thank you to Wendy. If our panel have no other comments, everybody's is good. Okay, we'd like to thank you, of course, the public and the media.
Donna, just to say that we have another press conference planned for next week, not to do with COVID, but to do with what I regard as a most exciting announcement that will have massive positive impact on the lives of everybody who live here. So there'll be a proper notice put out about that, but we'll have another press conference next week.
Thank you very much, Premier McLaughlin. And thank you to the public as well as the media for joining us for today's press brief, and of course to our panelists for providing us with all the necessary information. We invite you and remind you to go online to gov.ky for the latest and results and other COVID-19 related information, as well as to hsa.ky for a look at the vaccine schedule and much more. Until next week, we thank you for joining us and we wish you a wonderful evening.
All right. You want to use your address?